Hello, I'm Mr. Vosser. I'm a computing science teacher, and this video is about the web design and development unit and looking at the types of questions that we might be asked when we're completing the web design development unit assessments or the examination. So the web design development unit is focused on the development process of web-based solutions, so the analysis, the design, the implementation, as well as the testing and evaluation of that. But alongside that, we've got some web development tools that we'll be making use of, such as CSS, HTML, and JavaScript, and making sure that we've got a good handle on what that code looks like and the different elements that are used within it to be able to accurately and comprehensively answer questions in an assessment or an examination. So this video here will give you some exam style questions that you'll be able to work through, and we'll also talk through some model answers or suggested responses that would help you demonstrate your knowledge and give you a bit of further information and background about each of those areas. So hopefully that will be useful. Of course, web design and development is just one of the 4 units within higher computing science. There's also computer systems, database design development, and software design and development. You'll need to make sure that this is just part of your package of revision so that you're fully prepared for any assessments or examinations that you have coming up. Of course, if there's anything in this video that you come across and you're not really sure or it doesn't quite make sense, then do make sure you go and speak to your teacher, find other resources online, or refer back to your class notes and your class resources to see if that helps trigger your memory and you can get that back. But all that's left for me to say now is let's get going, and hopefully you find this useful.
So in this session, we are learning to apply our knowledge and computational thinking skills to analyse, design, implement, test and evaluate practical solutions to solve web-based problems. Of course, this is all in the context of an examination, so that implementation will be a theory-based implementation where we'll be writing out the code. We want to be able to recognise HTML, CSS and JavaScript development tools that have been used in the exam to be able to explain what the purpose behind them is and what the outcome will be. So we'll take each of the 3 development tools, HTML, CSS and JavaScript, and we'll also take the development process steps in terms of analysis, design, implementation, testing and the evaluation around that, and look at the types of questions we might be asked and how we'd go about answering them. So to be successful, by the end of the session, you'll be able to recognize the type of question that's being asked and understand the style of response needed, including the development tool that should be used to ensure you can maximize the number of marks available. You'll be able to apply that web design and development knowledge that you'll hopefully have already developed from being in class to be able to achieve full marks. Okay, let's take some look at some top tips. Here are some generic tips that you could apply to any examination, but I think it's really important to think about them in terms of a computing science context as well. So make sure you take the time to read the question and understand what you're being asked to do. So quite often there is information within the question which will help you problem solve the answer. So taking the time to understand any keywords, taking the time to understand all the information that's being presented to you is absolutely essential. Make sure as you're working through these questions, you're managing your mindset. It's going to be absolutely possible that sometimes there's questions that you don't really understand or you're not completely sure what the answer is. Well, taking that time to go through that question and understand what is being asked you will hopefully mean you can use your problem-solving skills to be able to work out the answer or something pretty close to the answer where you might pick up some marks. So keeping positive and continuing to have a go is really important. Of course, you've only got a limited amount of time in your assessment or your examination time, and making all of that time count is really important. Either spending the time methodically going through the paper and keeping to a time outline that you've set yourself, or using any spare time at the end to go back through your questions is absolutely critical. And finally, make sure you're keeping your answers really clear. Your teacher or the examiner will be marking your paper and they want to be able to easily identify what is your answer and potentially how you arrived at that answer. So making sure you've used a clear structure or you've clearly identified
where you've answered a question. If, for instance, you've had a go and then you've decided to have another go and make some changes and you've arrived to a different answer. You can just cross things out by putting a single line through them. The examiner will look for the answer and identify it, but just try and keep everything neat and tidy. Avoid scribbling or anything like that in the exam. Okay, let's have a little talk about what's going to happen in this video. So I'm going to present questions to you on the screen. I'll read through the question and I'll just make sure it's fully explained before I pause the video. When the video is paused, use the time to work through your answers. Once you've worked through the answer, unpause your video and then come back and see whether we've got the same answer, and I will talk you through how I worked through to get to that answer. Where there's the pause icon, there's also a suggested time about how long you should take on the question. This is a notional amount of time just to give you a bit of a guide, but I would certainly try to stick to that time as closely as possible to ensure that you're having the right pace for when you are in your assessment or examination.
We will begin by looking at a wireframe of a website. So a wireframe is used to design the visual layout of a web page, and wireframes clearly show navigational links, text areas, multimedia that's being used, position and types of the hyperlinks on a page as well. And of course, you can just have a page, just as we can see here, sketched out, or you can also have labels as well to clearly identify what is being shown on the page. So in this example here, we have a cinema is adding an online booking system to their website. The wireframe below has been created for the new homepage. And then we can see a layout with the media being identified in terms of where it will go. We've got identification of headings and menus. We can also see we've got some drop-down boxes there, as well as some buttons and some boxes of information floating in particular places. So the first question is state 2 reasons why this is not an effective user interface design. It's a 2-mark question, so it'll allow you about 2 minutes to do that. Pause the video now and have a go. So in terms of looking at reasons why this is not an effective user interface design, well, we can see that 2 drop-down boxes have no indication of what the inputs are going to be. There's no context for the media elements. We're not sure whether they're pictures, are they JPEGs, are they PNGs? There's no dimensions. We're not sure if this is to scale or not. There's inconsistent image alignment or sizes under like the Book Now button on the bottom right-hand side. Are they meant to be floating at different angles for a particular reason? We just can't tell. The file formats, as I've said, of the media haven't been specified, and that's, of course, important for when we get to the coding element. And there's no URL specified for the navigation links, or it's not explicitly clear where they will end up navigating to. So there's a lot of information there, and to pick up the 2 marks, you just have to clearly state a couple of items which have meant that it's not an effective user interface design. So hopefully it's a case of just looking at the design and picking out a couple of things that don't look quite right. Okay, question number 2. A low fidelity prototype has been created for the home page. Describe how this is used when performing usability testing. So this is a question where we're thinking about usability testing. It's a question where we're thinking about low fidelity prototypes and what their purposes is, and it's been used for the creation of a home page. It's a describe question, so we're going to need to give a little bit of information to explain why we've given our answer. It's a 2-mark question, so again, allow yourself around 2 minutes to read the question, process the information, and write your response. Now would be a good time to pause the video. Okay, hopefully with question 2, you've looked at the use of a low fidelity prototype and you've identified that this would be able to provide a scenario or give some kind of perspective to users on how a task would be performed, so they could begin to understand what the solution might look like. It allows the development team to observe users and receive feedback. And during that observation and that feedback gathering process, they'll be able to identify problems. So, for example, when we're looking at web-based development, we know that navigation is often a problem. For instance, it links to pages that are missing. There's orphan pages which aren't linked to anything else, or the hyperlink destinations, maybe if we're linking to somewhere externally, aren't working properly. So these will be identified. The difficulties will be recorded, and they will identify the improvements from that. So to gain your 2 marks, you just take 2 of these bullet pointed points that we have here and just develop them to explain the situation and what the development team would do with the low fidelity prototype and how that would inform the process going forwards. And that's just providing that description is what ensures you secure the marks. Okay, let's have a look at question number 3. For question number 3, we can see we've got a website. HTML5 elements have been used to define different parts of a web page, and you will have looked at lots of different HTML and HTML5 coding with your teacher, and I'm sure you'll have done lots of practice on that. So it's just a case of making sure you're taking that wide experience of different HTML5 tags and elements and feeling confident that you'll be able to recognize what would be an appropriate item to use for different parts of a web page. So here we've got a web page which is got men's jeans on it, and we can see there is a navigation bar at the top which has been highlighted and has been labeled A, and then at the bottom of the screen we've got an area with footer information and footer links, and that's been highlighted and labeled item B. So the question is, state which elements have been used for the parts labeled A and B, and we'll be looking for some HTML elements here to be able to code A and B. It's a 2-mark question. Shouldn't take you that long though, shouldn't take you a couple of minutes, because it's just a case of recalling information from your HTML experience. So pause the video and give that a go now. So area A is nav and area B is footer. These are the HTML element tags that you would use to program a navigation area into a website or a footer into the website. Question number 4. Scott Dance is a dance school which provides classes for children. A website is being created to display information about the dance school and to allow people to contact them, book classes, or hire the studio. The homepage is shown below. And then we've got an image. We can see Scott Dance on the left. We can see their logo on the right. They've got a navigational bar running across the top there. Then they've got a little bit of a central section with some information. And then finally, a footer with some information about the website design below. So the main element of the homepage is used to have the same CSS styles applied to it as the header element, with the exception of the CSS rule to set the height. The height rule should only be applied to the header element. The CSS rule applied to the header element at present is shown below. And then we've got header, open our squiggly brackets, background hyphen color, white, margin top 20px, margin bottom 20px, height 90px, closing our brackets. So write the new CSS rule required to style both the header and main elements in the most efficient way. Your answer should include the use of grouping selectors. So for clarity, we're looking at the main element and the header element, which are sharing quite a few CSS rules, apart from the height rule, which will only be applied to the header element. You're being asked to write the new CSS rules, so that's going to be more than one rule, and your answer should include the use of grouping selectors. So I would suggest one of those CSS rules will be a CSS rule that is making use of grouping selectors. It's a 2-mark question, but you're writing CSS and the CSS has been given to you. So I'd give yourself 2 to 3 minutes just to make sure that you're really accurate with your code and you can pick up both marks, because there's a lot of information in the question that will be able to help you out. Pause the video now while you do that. Okay, so there's a little recap of what we're being asked to do. let's take a look at the code that we could write. So the first CSS rule that I have is using grouping selectors. This is where I've grouped a couple of elements together, and the CSS is being applied to both the header as well as the main elements on the page. So you can see I've got background color white, margin top 20 pixels, margin bottom another 20 pixels. And then being only applied to the header element is the CSS rule height 90 pixels. Now you get 1 mark for doing your header element, and you get 1 mark for doing your header main CSS rules, but you need to make sure that you've got that absolutely correct, because you've been given the code already in the exam, so you know what it looks like, and you're just demonstrating that you have the ability to implement a single CSS rule and a grouping selectors CSS rules as well. So it's really important that you're very accurate to be able to pick up both marks here. Question number 5. The Studio Hire web page should include a form for online booking. When using the form, customers will need to submit the following information: name, mobile number, date required, session, where there's 3 choices, morning, afternoon, or evening, and then additional information, maximum 400 characters. Using this information, draw a wireframe design for the form on the Studio Hire webpage. The question's worth 4 marks. You're being asked to sketch out a wireframe design, so I would suggest you use a pencil and a ruler to be able to do this, just to keep it looking nice and neat. It is a 4-mark question. Give yourself up to 4 minutes to get this done. And remember, with your wireframes, nicely laid out, and include any labeled information to ensure there's real clarity on what your wireframe is meant to do. Pause the video now. So as a reminder, we're drawing a wireframe design for the Studio Hire webpage. We've got 5 pieces of information to include. Let's take a look at the wireframe and where the marks would get picked up. So I've sketched out a bit of a wireframe here, and you can see I've picked up my first mark for including informations or input spaces for the name, the mobile number, the date required, the session, and the additional information. So if you've got all 5 of those fields being inputted into the form, then you've picked up your first mark. You need some kind of input validation for the session information. So I've got a drop-down box there, which would allow them to select morning, afternoon, or evening, and you would be able to label that so it's really clear they would be the available options. You also need to do validation on any of the other inputs that are there. So I've gone for a date picker, and I've signified that by having a calendar date picking looking tool. You may wish to label that for clarity, or you might have labeled your additional information and said your additional information has got a maximum of 400 characters because that information was provided to us in the stem of the question. Alternatively, you might be providing some validation on the name or mobile number, maybe for name, minimum or maximum characters. Mobile phone numbers, we could be validating the format. Does it need to have the country code, or is it just a case of starting 07? And you would just need to label that to make the validation that you're using really clear. You also get a mark for having a submission button, and you can label that to say what the button does, but you don't have to in this case. It should be nice and clear, as long as you've given it a name that is obvious and it looks like it's going to act as a button. So that's your 4 marks that are available, and just taking the time to sketch that out so it's nice and neat is really worth doing. Okay, let's take a look at question number 6. A form on the Contact Us webpage is created using the HTML code shown below. I've just taken a snippet of the code out here, and we've got form, and we can see here we've got the name, input type equals text, name equals name, and size equals 40. And then it says required, and then we've got a couple of break tags. State the type of validation used when inputting the name. So we're being asked here to identify a type of validation that's being used on this form. So it's a 1-mark question, should take you less than 60 seconds. This is a recall question to be able to identify a type of validation that's being used. The type of validation is, of course, a presence check. A presence check is where the computer is making sure that data has been entered and is in fact present. So you just need to put present check to state the type of validation to get the mark that's available. Looking at question number 7, it's important that the website is fully tested and evaluated. Testing should include that all input validation works correctly. When testing the form, 2 errors are found. When entering the number of days per week for a training, a user can enter any number. Rewrite the code so that the number of days entered is restricted to between 1 and 7 inclusive. So this is validation on a website. It's forming part of a form. We obviously had some form code in the last question, so we'd be able to look at that code to give us an idea of the type of input that we would be making. We know here that we're trying to make an input for the number of days, and we have been given information that we wish to restrict that input to between 1 and 7 days inclusive. So that means including 1 and 7. So 1 mark question, we're going to write some HTML code, and we just want to take our time, about a minute, to be able to get that code as accurate as possible. Pause the video now. Okay, so here's the HTML code then that we'd want to be able to use on a website to be able to input numbers between 1 and 7 and check that they're validated to ensure the user has indeed put in the numbers between 1 and 7. So input type equals number, name equals days, min equals 1, max equals 7. Now you, of course, may have used a different name to describe your input in this example here. That would be absolutely fine as long as you've got the input type as a number and we've got some kind of name for the information that's being inputted, as well as a minimum value of 1 and a maximum value of 7. So it's just a case of writing some HTML code. Let's take a look at question number 8. So we've got a bit more information here, a little bit more code, and this is for the email address that's going in. And we can see input type equals text, name equals email, size equals 45, max length equals 5, required. A couple of breaks again. There is also an error on the email field. State the change required to the HTML code to ensure that the most email addresses can be entered on the form. So it's a 1 mark question, and we're looking at adapting the code that we've been given already to ensure that most email addresses can be entered successfully into the form. So it's a case of taking up to a minute to read that code, formulating your answer, and identifying what change you'll be making, or you could rewrite it, but I suggest just stating the change would be slightly easier. Pause the video now. So hopefully you identified, changed the max length to a more appropriate length. So at the moment, it's 5 characters long. That's too short. So we can see the size is 45. So we might want to make the max length the same as the size, or just make the max length a more sensible length. So I would suggest 40 is a more than sensible number of characters for entering an email address. I mean, you could also change max length to min length. So the minimum length that they enter would be 5. And I would expect email addresses to be at least 5 characters long. Or you could remove that criteria altogether because we've identified the size of the field at 45 already. So there's certainly a few options that you can do to make changes there. It's just being clear in what change would be required to be able to pick up the 1 mark that is available. Okay, here's question number 9. Classes interested in. Select name equals choice of class, and then we've got 3 values. Option value ballet, and the text that appears there is ballet. Option value equals modern. You can see there the option text that appears is modern. Option value equals tap, and then we've got the tap option. The select element is closed, and we've got a couple of breaks again for spacing out. A drop-down list is used to enter the choice of class. Describe 2 reasons for using a drop-down list rather than radio buttons on a form. So this is a 2-mark question, giving a couple of reasons on why we would use a drop-down list rather than radio buttons. Up to 2 minutes to get this done. Pause the video now and give that a go. Okay, so using a drop-down list reduces the screen area that's required because it takes up less room, especially if you've got lots of options. With 3 options, you're going to save a little bit of room, not huge amounts, but if you had a big list, then you would be saving lots of room by having a drop-down box. Another reason is potentially using radio buttons. It could be possible that people would make multiple selections. So if we're just wanting them to select one option, then a drop-down list would be perfect for that. Turning to question number 10, compatibility testing should also be carried out on the website. State one problem that might be identified when testing compatibility. So we're going to undertake some compatibility testing. What is the purpose of this type of testing? It's a knowledge recall question worth 1 mark. You should be able to recall that information within a minute and get it written down. Do that now. So looking at the answer, the reason we're going to undertake specific compatibility testing on different browsers or devices is to identify device-specific problems or browser-specific problems. And you could, by all means, state a particular problem that might be occurred, or the kind of more general, we are testing for browser or device problems. Both will be able to get you the 1 mark that is available. Let's look at question number 11. Bailey's Dog Kennels is developing a website. The website will have a multi-level structure consisting of a home page with a horizontal navigational bar that links to 4 main web pages: kennels, grooming, gallery, and contact us. The grooming web page will have links to 3 sub-pages showing costs, treatments, and photos. Design a multi-level structure for this website. This is a 2-mark question. You're being asked to draw out the structure. I would make use of a pencil and a ruler to ensure this is really presentable and clear and easy for the assessor to be able to understand. It's a 2-mark question. Shouldn't take you more than a couple of minutes to get this information sketched down. Okay, so a reminder of the question. We're being asked to design a multi-level structure for a website that's got a home page, 4 main pages, and then 3 sub-pages as well. You can see here in the design, the multi-level design that's been created here, there's a home page at the top with the 4 pages coming off the home page. There's 1 mark available for that, and then a second mark showing grooming with its 3 sub-pages: costs, treatment, and photos. There's no information about the navigation, so this is just showing the structure of the website to get your 2 marks. Looking at question number 12, a browser displays the header element of the home page as shown below. Complete the CSS to style the header. This is a 3-mark question, and we need to make sure when we're writing CSS that we're really focused on being as accurate as we can. And we're going to write some CSS that will be able to display the header element of the home page as we've been shown. Looking into question number 12 here, you can see that we've been given some CSS already to work from, and it's a case of adding some additional information in. So we've got the header element, we've got the image banner element, and we've got the H1 element with the rules that go along with that. And we're just being asked to fill in 3 blanks. So you'll want to spend 2 to 3 minutes on this question, just making sure that you've read the CSS all the way through. You can see the banner that we are coding the style of in the bottom right-hand corner there. So that should give you a really good indication of the types of commands that you're going to need to use to be able to get that CSS to work as expected. Pause the video now. So for your 3 marks, we're looking to be able to get the properties of background color into the header, the rules for the header. In the image banner rules, we're adding ourselves the margin information. And then we need both the property and the value within the H1 element. And it's looking for a float. And then we're putting it to the right. And that's really important that we're using float, because then that will work across a variety of devices, which ensures compatibility. A mark for each of those 3, giving you 3 marks. Turning our attention to question 13, the navigational bar shown below makes use of the following CSS. And then we can see the navigational bar of home, kennels, grooming, gallery, contact us. And we know from the structure of the website that we've already designed that we've got sub-pages coming off some of those pages. And we know that this is a hierarchical website that's been set up. So we can see nav UL as our first CSS rule, refers to list style type none, background color light gray. We then have nav UL li, float left. We then have nav UL li a, display block, color green, width 100px, text align, center, padding 14px. And then we have nav li a hover, background color black, color white. Now it's really important we've taken the time to look at what CSS rules are going to be applied to what HTML elements and how they've been grouped together. Remember, even when you're looking at what can appear as quite complex CSS, all CSS rules consist of the same parts. The selectors, which point to the HTML elements that you want to style, the declaration of each of those rules, and that declaration is made up of a property and a value. And you can see here the declaration box contains one or more declarations, and they're separated by semicolons. The property and the value are separated by the colon, and we can also see that the curly brackets are used to be able to group all the rules together. So the question, display why descendant selectors are used here. This is a 2-mark question, so pause the video now, giving yourself up to 2 minutes to get this done. I've shown you both the question and the code side by side to make it nice and easy. So we've already spoken about selectors, but this question is a little bit tricky because it's talking about descendant selectors. So coders may want selectors to match an element that is the descendant of another element. So for example, in a navigation structure, we would be, say, going from one page to a group of sub-pages, and those sub-pages in that navigation experience will be descendant selectors of the original selector. So this relationship can be shown through design, and we'll be able to, through the code that was written, specify whether the style will apply to an ordered list, particular part of the list, and all the anchor elements. And it's just a case of having a real clarity in why this has been done, and that's to aid the user experience. And the style will only apply where the coder has asked the style to be applied using the HTML. Question number 14 continues the explanation of this navigational bar and asks us to describe how the navigational bar changes when the pointer is moved over one of the hyperlinks. It's a 1-mark question. This will be understanding some code and then describing or explaining what that bit of code is doing. So it's a 1-mark question. Here's the code on the screen as well. Pause the video and give it a go. So we're looking to describe how the navigational bar changes when the pointer is moved over one of the hyperlinks. The background color changes to black and the text color changes to white. And we can see that happening in the code. If you need to rewind and have another look at that, then do. And the purpose of that change is to make it really obvious to the user where their mouse pointer is in the navigational bar. Okay, looking at question number 15. The hyperlinks work if the user clicks on or near the text. Identify the line of code that allows this to happen. Well, when we're looking at the code, we want to be able to identify what allows us to click on the text or the area near to the text. It's a 1-mark question. Pause the video now to give it a go. When we looked at the CSS rules with the nav, ul, li, a set of rules, we could see display was set to block. And this means the block of area around the text becomes a clickable link. And we knew we were looking at that block of code or that set of CSS rules because A is the HTML tag for ahref, which is the code that we would use to be able to get a link on a web page. So we would be looking within our navigation structure of the navigation bars to identify where the links were being set up, and then we could identify what was allowing the text or the area around the text, and that's because we are seeing that area as a block that can be clicked by the user to navigate to the page, and that is what is happening. We're now going to take some time to look at a website as well as the code that goes alongside that. So the homepage for Bailey Dog's Kennel is shown below. When the mouse is placed over the image in the main section, the image changes. When the mouse is moved away from the image should return to the original one. However, at present, this is not happening. And then we've got some code on the right-hand side. We've got our head section set up, which includes some script. We've got the body section set up, which includes our header area, our navigation area, our main area, and our footer area. And we can see that's all nicely laid out and clear as well. Let's take a slightly closer look. So in the head section, I said there was the script. So currently the script has one function, and that function is function rollover. And then there is a parameter my image in there, and my image.src equals, and then it gives us the location of the image file bailey2.png. Also, to draw your attention, a little bit of code is in the main section. We have the h2 image id equals dog1 image, src equals, and then the location of bailey1.png, and that's got a little bit of additional code in there. On mouse over equals roll over, and then in brackets this. So that is the HTML code calling the JavaScript that I've just spoken about in the head section. So just make sure you've looked really carefully at those two pieces of code. So the first part of question 16 is to write the new function to display the original image when the mouse is moved away from the image. This is a JavaScript coding question. Give yourself a couple of minutes, and if you need to make use of the code that's already there, then absolutely do that. Pause the video now. Hopefully you've been able to write the new function to display the original image. When the mouse is moved away from the image, you'll have been able to identify the image name is Bailey1, and that's in the images folder. And hopefully you've been able to write a function, so function mouse away, but you could have given the function a different name, as long as it was something sensible. We are then opening the brackets, putting my underscore image in there, and then setting up the value for my image, which is in the images folder, Bailey1. And you want to make sure you've got your syntax and your code accurate to be able to get your 2 marks there. 1 mark for your function name with the parameter being set up, and then the second mark for making sure that you're changing the source attribute of that parameter to the Bailey1 image, and you've got the correct file path for that image. Okay, continuing question 16 with that code, rewrite the appropriate HTML element to call the function created in the last question when the mouse is moved away from the image. So we've got 2 minutes here to be able to write a bit more code, and this time it's HTML code that we will be focused on. Pause the video now. So when we rewrite our HTML code, we're going to be looking at the image ID equals dog1 image, src equals, and then the location of the file. And then we're adding the JavaScript event of onMouseOver equals rollover in brackets this, onMouseOut equals mouse away, and then in brackets this. To get your 2 marks, your first mark is coming from you adding the onMouse event to the image element, and you will have already had the code there for the onMouseOver event. So it should be a case of just adapting that. And then your second mark is making reference to the onMouseOut event and calling that function that you've written, which we called mouse away in the previous question. I did say you could call it anything as long as you called it something sensible. So as long as you've made use of the same function name, then you'll get the second mark. Making sure, of course, that you've got your syntax nice and accurate in this question. Okay, just continuing on with our final part for question 16. Bailey's dog kennels installed an intelligent heating system. Describe one environmental benefit to using a heating system which is intelligent. This is a 1-mark question, so pause and give yourself about a minute to get that description written down. Effectively, to get the mark for this question, there's quite a range of answers that are acceptable, and it's just making sure that you're hitting a sensible point about using an intelligent heating system. So anything that suggests they're making a proactive decision by getting software or apps that reduce the usage by, for example, automatically switching the heater off or on when they're within a particular range. So maybe when they've got the kennels inhabited, then the heating will be on and looking after the dogs. If the kennels are empty, then they will not be making use of the system. Monitoring and responding to external weather conditions. So you could talk about how the kennels and the heating system could detect the temperature outside and then be able to forecast with weather forecasts whether the heating is going to need to be increased or decreased depending on those external weather conditions. And of course, as well as using weather forecasts and current external weather conditions, could also make use of heating based on historical patterns of data. When are they most likely going to need their heating switched on or switched off, and try and be intelligent so the heating isn't left on all the time. And this is about, protecting the environment, so not heating a space which isn't being used. There's also the option there to be able to make use of zoned heating. Any of those options are completely acceptable as long as you've given a nice, clear description around your answer so that it's justified.
Well, hopefully you found the last 40 to 45 minutes useful. I think really dialing in and looking at the different aspects of the web design development unit should hopefully have been of use to you. We looked at a range of development tools, including CSS, some HTML, as well as some JavaScript, and how that's used at the higher level, and the types of responses and the types of detail and accuracy that we need when writing that type of code. So making sure you've got that accuracy is really important, and making sure that if there's something that you've kind of identified from this video is a bit challenging, then you're going away and you're looking at your class notes, you're finding other revision materials online, or speaking to your teacher to ensure you can get further support. Then that will prepare you as best as you can for your future assessments or examinations. Of course, the Web Design Development Unit is just one of the 4 units available at Higher Computing Science, alongside Computer Systems, Database Design and Development, and Software Design and Development. So do make sure if you've got those areas to revise as well or study for, then please go and do that. Okay, all that's left for me to do is to wish you the very best of luck in your final assessments and examination, and I hope you have a very successful time with those. Thanks very much for watching.